Welcome to the end of the first act. Previously, we talked a lot about how scenes usually have a point, and that point usually happens at the end of the scene, because that's how scenes are structured. But that's a very formulaic way of writing, and it's not always true. In this scene, nothing happens. There's really no ending. It just kind of goes on. But the reason for that is because it is the final scene of the first act. So, if you think of the whole first act as a scene, this would have been the point of the scene. We got the four girls together. This is them being together. It is the end of the first act. Now, obviously, this scene is all about the four girls having a great time. That's the whole point of the scene. It's just the reward for having gotten them together. Here is them together. But it is an incredibly dangerous kind of scene to write, because it's super easy to come off as overly sentimental or mawkish or goofy, and obviously those aren't the emotions you want. You're trying to sell the fact that these girls are having just a brilliant summer. And in order to do that, you have to actually show them having a brilliant summer, and it can be tough to make that stick without it feeling really forced. If you've watched my episodes on the Stanley Parable, you know that the Stanley Parable has an ending sequence with deserts and overwrought music. And it is stunning. It is breathtaking. And the reason the Stanley Parable could pull that off is because it's a comedy game. So if it doesn't connect, well, that's the point. It is beauty hidden in the comedy in the Stanley Parable, but there's no comedy here. This has to stand on its own. And for the most part, I think it succeeds. And the reason it succeeds is because it happens at the end of the act. It is the final scene that we were building up to this whole time. Coming into this scene with the power of an act behind us definitely helps. If this was just seen randomly out of nowhere in a YouTube video with a guy talking over it, it would definitely appear pretty insubstantial and twee, right? But these images are pretty important to the story, and there are a couple of ways that they try and make sure that these images land even just within the scene, rather than relying 100% on momentum from the rest of the story. One basic practice is to get the player to volunteer. You're the one that starts the scene. In fact, you take several actions that do nothing besides start the scene, and it starts by turning the music up, which turns it from a tinny background track into a full-blown, full orchestral track. Which song you get varies depending on whether you're in streamer mode or not, but the idea is the same either way. Take a listen. Giving the player agency over incoming missions and incoming scenes is always a good idea, and famously GTA pioneered that. They had a hard time because the players would just walk up to a building and a mission would start, so they added green circles, so you'd go into the green circle and the mission would start, but even that felt too passive, so you go into the green circle and then you hit a button and the mission starts. It's all buying into the idea that you're going to have a mission. Once you volunteer aggressively enough for the mission, you're willing to go through the mission. It's the same thing here. Once you turn up the music, you're volunteering to see the rest of the scene, even though obviously you have no choice. Another thing they do is they cut really fast. Nothing lasts terribly long in this sequence, and that's because if any given thing feels too mawkish, well, it'll be gone in a second, so it'll be okay. They're just trying to give you a collage of girls having fun, so they only have to hit with some of them. This is in a stark contrast to the Stanley Parable's attempt to do this. That lasted like 10-15 seconds per cut, and they had to do that because they had to fall back on the idea that it was a joke. If you didn't feel like these scenes were just breathtakingly beautiful, you might get disenchanted, and then you would have to have that 2 to 3 second flick where you realize that you can laugh at it. But they didn't have that option here, so they didn't need that extra 2 or 3 seconds, so the cuts are real fast. And then you're right along into the next one, which hopefully you'll like better. The other big technique they use is they show a lot of faces, a lot of reaction shots. This is a classic approach because it takes it from the artists are now rendering the most beautiful summer anyone could ever have, and change that into this girl thinks this is the most beautiful summer she has ever had, which is obviously much more forgiving. This is a classic technique. Dragon Ball Z uses it, right? Someone gets punched, and the punch is rendered to try and make it look like the punch is really hard, but the artists don't rely on you believing that that is the biggest punch that has ever been shown. They immediately cut to the peanut gallery, and there's Krillin going, and there's Bulma going, and there's whoever else. They're all gasping, and you get that shocked expression, and it sells the fact that that punch is impressive to them. So regardless of how well the punch was drawn as it was being delivered, you buy that it, in world, was an extremely devastating punch. Same idea here. You buy that these girls, especially us, the main character, are having the time of our lives, even if the artistry doesn't, render it up to snuff. The artistry, for the most part, does, but it's still a very powerful technique to keep our considerations on the fact that these are characters existing within this summer, not just a beautiful summer being thrown into our faces. Emotional scenes are really hard to make because the emotions in the scene are not the emotions in the writer, at least not at the same time. This scene hits in like 30 seconds, right? And the audience is supposed to feel, oh my god, this summer was so beautiful. But the author can't feel that way while they are making the scene because at the very least, it takes them a friggin' week to make the scene, so obviously they can't feel it in 30 seconds. Trying to sustain a combination of emotion and objectivity so that you can make a scene that lands hard in 30 seconds, even though you've looked at it 100 times today, that is rough. It takes a lot of craft, and you have to really understand how to feel the power of the scene, even though you've been exposed to it constantly from the inside out. I think that a lot of people shy away from that. I think a lot of writers make fairly emotionless stories because they don't trust that they can portray the feelings. I mean, they'll start writing it, they're like, this is going to be an emotional scene, but, half an hour into writing that 30-second scene, your feeling is gone, and you start to feel tepid. You start to feel like, hey, can I really deliver on this promise? Can I really cause these emotions? I mean, I don't feel them anymore. I'm not feeling this anymore. Well, of course you're not feeling it anymore. You spent 60 times longer than you should have in this scene. You've got to understand how to harness your own emotional nature and also how to harness your own objectivity so that you can look at it emotionally for the 100th time as if it were new. It's really not an easy thing to master, but that's why you should do it a lot. That's why you should write emotional scenes as much as you can. And if you're nervous about it, don't do it this way. Do it the Stanley Parable way. Make it into a comedy. This is the most overwrought scene I could possibly make, because it's way easier to pull back than to push forward. So if you make a comedy scene and it ends up making you feel some way, you know that you've done it right. There are a million techniques used in this scene and in any scene like it. And those techniques are deployed over the course of weeks of work. How do they end up making a 30-second scene that actually hits? You got to learn it. You got to try it. You got to put it together. You got to edit it. You got to see if it feels right tomorrow. You got to show it to somebody, see if they connect with it. This is one of the hardest skills to just hit the ground running with. It is something you absolutely need to actively work at. You might need to actually go to your friends or, a Discord group or something and say, this is how this scene works at the moment. What do you think? You'll definitely find people who are perfectly willing to tell you what they think. But keep in mind, you gotta have the lead up. If you just drop an emotional scene in their lap, they're not going to buy it. It's going to come off as mawkish. If you don't know why, go back and listen to the first half of this video again. So at the end of the day, I'm really arguing that we should write more emotional stories. I think a lot of us nerds come up with pretty flat stories. They have some cool ideas in them, but they don't end up really connecting with the audience because there's no emotion to them. The emotions we imagine in our story tend to be pretty trite, delivered in kind of a algorithmic way. Of course, this person is angry because his village was burned down. Therefore, he is angry, and that's supposed to connect with someone, right? But you got to show it. You got to use the techniques. You got to feel that emotion for a week while you're creating a scene that's 30 seconds long. And you just got to do it. You just got to try it. You just got to polish it. You just got to test it out. There's just no other way around it. So get out there and write some really crappy emotional scenes, because otherwise you won't ever be able to write good ones.
Oh, I know. I should capture some of this for my before and after.